Hello and most welcome to 1906 of the H series. We will today continue with Rab Hatfield's article, Botticelli's Mystic Nativity, Savonarola and the Millennium. Last time we looked closely into some of the depictions that are following with the article by Savonarola, and we saw that these depictions are more showing to the right hemisphere. They are a sort of propaganda, if you like, to the right hemisphere. And opening up to a greater value or bigger values, where contradictions are taken in, or as Ian McKilcrew said, the coincidence of contradictions. By so doing, we open up for a bigger, greater reality. We are not losing singularity by taking in plurality. Neither do we lose plurality by taking in singularity. We go beyond the either or limitation. We become larger, extended. And we deepen our understanding. One of those things we mentioned last time was on page 94, and how the Godmother, the Mother of God, or Holy Mary, she is Sacrario dello Spirito Santo Singulare, because by it she was singularly full of all of the graces. And although she was a cornucopia of plurality at the same time, one thing doesn't exclude another one. And that also goes for the Trinity. He is both three and one, like the hymn from the Anglican Church. One in three and three in one. Both at the same time. I'd say this has great connections to what we earlier looked into. In the diary case by Canfield. How time has different rules. The time to tell whether Tacitus was correct in saying that Spiro died from a conspiracy rather than a simple manslaughter, or that The famous chess player Achillon, his name was, had a game with no less than 5 queens or not, or whether Julius Caesar blinked or how an even number of times when he met Brutus. There are different rules. There are different times, so to speak. There is a great similarity between the idea of, or the misunderstanding, which is the private language case, that you can have private meaning and private unregistered rules, none heard of, never taken into account, and with immediate access to tell differences. The idea of orthogonal space in 3 directions, X, Y, Z. And the timeline passing there without action, properties, I would say, no criterion. The whole of the Newtonian space/time is without criterion. You just say truth and it's pretty much hanging in the air. It never enters into the context. It doesn't have a saying. I'd say it's simply not grounded in anything. Unfounded in an act, a doing, or often mentioned by Canfield and Francis Y. Lynn, Paul Johnston, a stage setting. No longer do we have a history where things past help to enact and make sense of our words. I say in the end, a bit like Jacques Derrida's dissemination, our words are no longer seminated, no longer bursting with meaning, having force, being able to do things. They become unseminated or not seminated, impotent, empty concepts. Unable to do anything. And it's, although it doesn't sound like a great difference, the difference is enormous. The criterion makes possible all sorts of action, entrances, whereas the Cartesian Newtonian private language or the empty beetle box have no action whatsoever. It's dysfunctional and inactive. And it sort of clings to the idea of truth in the air, and therefore the idea of monosemic and contradictions as being decisive. Those could actually be called the private rules that doesn't make any sense, that do not have a working feature. I will continue to read where I left off. I think if I remember correctly, the last word was closes. And I will continue with Savonarola, which is the second paragraph on this rather long page. Savonarola naturally discusses the great wonder in heaven, that is, the woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. 12 stars. She is Mary, that glorious mother. The stars in her crown signify her privileges, of which Savonarola gives the entire list, reminding his listeners that he had previously discussed Mary's 12 privileges in his book of Revelations. Revelations. Long ago, she gave birth to Christ. Christ. To Christ. Now, she wants to give birth to the Florentine people, a spiritual people, a good people. Good. Later on, somewhat shifting his ground, he states that this woman's desire to give birth signifies that this church has Christ in its heart and would like to give birth to him in the hearts of one and all in order that everyone may be good. Good. Singular goodness. Again, shifting his ground, he identifies the great red dragon with the tribulations of the Florentines. Which are for their own good, and which also by implication must be due to the persecutions of Antichrist. Antichrist, oh dear. I'll put the headphones on if you want to join. Antichrist. He further identifies the dragon with a Chiapidi or Typidi, the uncommitted Florentines whom he hated almost as much as those who opposed him openly. Openly. Commenting on this way, in which the woman's child was caught up onto God. Revelation 12:5. Savonarola says this means that she drew our hearts up to heaven. Heaven. Up to heaven. The woman herself fled to wilderness where God had prepared a place for her. For her, there she was to stay and be fed for 1260 days. That is 3.5 years of times. Times and time again. Savonarola says that he does not wish to tell his listeners what this means. means. Savonarola says that he does not wish to tell his listeners what this means. He ends with a statement that Satan wants to fight. The angels want to fight. And the angels will win. Hooray! As Savonarola's Assumption Day sermon connects the privileges of Mary with the 2 chapters of Revelation, to which reference is explicitly made in the painting's inscription, and also prophesies the coming of the power of Christ on earth and the defeat of the dragon. It seems likely that the sermon, which was probably in print by early 1501, had a great deal to do with the imagery of Botticelli's mystic Nativity. Nativity! The inscription to the mystic Nativity reads, "This picture at the end of the year 1500, in the troubles of Italy, I, Alessandro, painted in half the time after the time. At the time of the fulfillment of the 11th of St. John, in the second woe of the apocalypse of the woe, in the losing of the devil for 3.5 years. Then he shall be chained according to the 12th, and we shall see him as in this picture. Tauftin grafin to teleto etus entais tarachias tis Italias Alexandros ego en to meta chronon imirchono graphon para to endecaton tu agio Ioanni en to apocalypseos voe en ti liseton geca imisi eton tu diavolo epitha, desmofisete, entoivke, vlepsomen, nonomoin ti graphi tauti. Graphi tauti. Afti. Botticelli clearly accepts the responsibility for what we see here, but he evidently wanted this responsibility as well as the astonishing information that the inscription insinuates to be known only to persons able to decipher it. Even for those who can read Greek, it is far from clear at first glance what he is driving at. The inscription invites us to recall chapters 11 and 12 of the book of Revelation. Each of these deals with a 3.5-year period in world history. In the second of which Botticelli believes himself to be living, perhaps in a figurative sense. Figurative. The period in chapter 11 which completes the second vow of the seventh seal, concerns two holy witnesses clothed in sackcloth and having fire coming from their mouths. There are two prophecy in the holy city for 1260 days before being slain. Their bodies are not to be suffered to be buried. Buried. And 1260 days before being slain. Slain. Horrendous things. The bodies are not to be suffered to be buried, and they are to ascend in a cloud. in a cloud. The clear implication of Botticelli's inscription, written at the time of the fulfillment of the 11th of St. John, is that these things have recently been accomplished in fact. Whom can he possibly have thought the two witnesses to have been, if not Savonarola and his collaborator, Fra Domenici da Pescia? They had indeed prophesied for close to 3.5 years from the terrible St. Matthew's Day of 1494,
1494.
when news of the entry into Italy of Charles the Eighth of France and his army reach Florence. Or for almost 3.5 years from the day on which the French enter the city. That is 17th of November, 1494.
Mm. Oj, oj, oj. 1494. November.
From their mouths had indeed issued fire and thunderings.
Fire and thunderings.
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 Oh,
Thunderings.
I hear you.
Thunderings. 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 Fire and thunderings.
That is according to the interpretation of these apocalyptic words that were transcribed into a Bible for Savonarola's use. Use.
Transcribing the Bible.
The preachings that would first cause them to be burned and then go forth after their deaths. Their bodies indeed had not been buried, but ascended in a cloud of smoke on 23rd of May, 1498.
Oj, oj, oj.
Antichrist is to be responsible for the deaths of the two witnesses who are described as olive trees. Both before himself being slain on the Mount of Olives. It was feared in Botticelli's day that Antichrist would come 1500 years after Christ.
Oj, oj, oj.
Oh dear.
Antichrist would come 1500 years after Christ.
Oh dear. Strictly speaking, this belief meant that he was to appear publicly in 1530 on the assumption that his life would mirror that of Christ, who appeared publicly to teach only when he reached the age of 30.
30.
30.
30.
But it is clear from other great works of art, such as Dürer's Apocalypse Cycle 1498 and Signorello's frescoes of the last things in the Cathedral of Orvieto, that there was a widespread fear that the end might come in 1500.
Oj, oj, oj.
Oh dear. Savonarola rejected the belief that Antichrist would come 1500 years after Christ in a sermon delivered in the autumn of 1491.
Mm.
1491.
Mm.
Oh dear. Only a couple of years before the discovery of the Americas. 1492. but his having raised the question publicly can only have fixed it more vividly in the minds of his listeners. Savonarola also admitted that Antichrist would probably come soon. Soon.
Suchen. Suchen. Suchen.
According to the book of Revelation, Antichrist is to be born in Babylon.
Babylon.
If Botticelli was aware that when John wrote Revelation said Babylon, he usually meant Rome, then for him Antichrist would have been Pope Alexander VI, even if the Pope had not been born in Rome.
Alexander VI. The Porsche Pope.
Now, it was frequently claimed during Botticelli's time that the two witnesses and or Antichrist were coming soon. And in the invective of the age, we often find enemies of all sorts being labeled as Antichrist. Antichrist. Oh dear. For example, Savonarola was called the emanation of Antichrist by no less a celebrity than Marsilio Ficini.
Ficino.
But to have said that both the two witnesses and Antichrist had come, and to have identified these figures in all earnest with known persons as the Greek inscription to Botticelli's painting appear to do is quite unheard of. Unheard of. Why? Small wonder that in the perilous years for Savonarola's supporters at the beginning of the 16th century, Botticelli should have worded his inscription so elusively. Elusively. In Revelation 12, we are already in the third woe, during which Satan is cast to earth for 3.5 years. 3.5 years. It's a long time.
No, it's not a long time.
Long way to Tipperary, it's a long way to go. This is the period in which, according to his inscription, Botticelli thinks he is living.
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 Ah.
Living. As we have seen, much of the 12th chapter concerns the woman of the Apocalypse.
Mm.
Who is to give birth to a man child and be persecuted by Satan.
Oj, 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 oj.
Oh dear.
Ah. Ah.
After the third woe in chapter 12, an angel is to come down, bind Satan with a great chain,
Mm.
and cast him into the bottomless pit. Oh dear.
Mm. Hooray.
Hooray. There are to follow 1,000 years during which the resurrected martyrs and true believers will reign with Christ.
Hooray, hooray, hooray.
In the Biblioteca Nazionale Centrale of Florence is a Bible of 1491 with annotations long believed to have been made by Savonarola. Savonarola, oh dear,
Mm.
oh,
Ah.
Savonarola, oh, 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 oh. It is now clear that they were made by Fra Domenico da Pescia,
Yes.
fish. But there can be little doubt that they were meant for Savonarola's use.
Mm. Mm.
Indeed. The annotations to the book of Revelation are particularly numerous, practically supplying a complete gloss. They must be related to Savonarola's sermons on the Apocalypse, the texts of which unfortunately do not survive.
Oh, no.
The annotation to chapter 20 begins, "This treats of the damnation of the devil." But first, it shows that he was bound in the first coming of Christ. According to the annotation, the angel is Christ. and his coming down is Christ's incarnation. This interpretation of the binding of Satan was by no means new. Already St. Augustine had explained that the devil is bound from the first coming of Christ to the end of the world, which will be Christ's second coming. What the binding of the devil means is that he is not permitted to exert his whole power of temptation, either by force or by guile, to seduce men to his side. That would be an excellent stopping point. Side. 1906.
Page 101. Page 101.
101.
PDF, it's 15.
Indeed, 101. Let's go for some quotes. Let's see here what to look for. If we go to page 98, or even to page 97, just where we started, we have a very nice, once more, a right hemisphere depiction here, but in writing, can also work. It's the very first line I read. That is the woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. She is Mary, that glorious mother. The stars in her crown signify her privileges, of which Savonarola gives the entire list, reminding his listeners that he had previously discussed Mary's 12 privileges in his book of Revelations, with a plural. 12 is an important figure here. It's divisible by 6, 4, 3, 2, 1, and itself. One of those mighty figures. It is also a figure of the right hemisphere. And a division by 5 makes it impossible for the left hemisphere, but 5, 7, and 9 brings further details to the 12, which are not accessible to the left hemisphere. This is one of those great numbers. It is also a number depicted in the hanging crowns that we had on page we read last, 94. Together, the Trinity makes up 12 as well. Multiply by 3, 4, 2, and 1. You'll have the 12 privileges of the Virgin, also mentioned here. So we stretch a bit further than ordinary left hemisphere matter, so to speak. It is what Graham Priest calls the excluded middle. God makes it defunct, or I would even add the excluded middle when it is defunct, entrat Dio. This is when God enters. The entrance of God comes in the inclusion of contradictions. That is the very clue. You can also see that there are 12 heights in the last crown. Benedictus Dominus Deus Israel quia visita. Those are exactly 12, and I say that is no happenstance. It defies logic, and thereby God can enter. He is excluded by the excluded middle, so to speak. After that, we can go to page 98. And the fourth, or I have to read the whole sentence, second line, commenting on the way in which the woman's child was caught up onto God. Savonarola says that this means that she drew our hearts up to heaven. So this is the very opening to open the hearts to heaven. So in the new logic that opposes or take in oppositions, this becomes a possibility. Entrat the impossible as well. So that's the third entrance. A good guess in this Greek scripture, which is so hard to understand, therein lies also one of the mysteries here, buried by Botticelli, is pointing to the mystery of the inclusion of oppositions. In page 99, we also have this assumption that Antichrist would come 1500 years after Christ. This sort of ending process is a sort of criterion for what you could say criterion of the event of Antichrist. In the second paragraph here, there is a mentioning that Antichrist is to be responsible for the deaths of the two witnesses, if you go to the second paragraph, who are described as olive trees, before himself being slain on the Mount of Olives. So here we have criterions, and we have this other, so to speak, non-linear conception of time, a more open-ended, allowing, but also regulated by different criterions. And one criterion here is 1500 years. That is not of slight importance. Once we exit monosemia, so to speak, and go into this more allowing, grander reality, where the regulating fashions are constantly different, having different acquirances. As in the example we mentioned with Tacitus, the blinking of the eyes of Julius Caesar when he was about to be murdered horribly. All those are pretty clear criterions. Of course, we said last time, it would be very hard to know how many times he actually blinked, but there is a criterion. It is connected to the reality of happenings. God does not enter as something transcendental or unreal. He enters as a complete reality in flesh, and is singularly mirrored by Antichrist in Babylon. And this we discussed before. The third line from the top here is actually quite good here. According to the book of Revelation, Antichrist is to be born in Babylon. If Botticelli was aware that when John, who wrote Revelation, said Babylon, he usually meant Rome, Then for him, Antichrist would have been Pope Alexander VI. This is one of those ambiguous things. I'd say even more likely that he thought it was Jerusalem, but it still works because it's ambiguous. It's double pointing. It has both ends. And the last page I read, go back all the way to 101, if you may. There we have a little, should have a colored depiction here, but it's a shame. Here we see the embracing, and this is the mystic nativity. Angels kissing and embracing. This shows the heavens up above, impossible here on earth, are hugging its opposition, the material, the corporal, the living. This is particle and wave. I think it's just great. And it's so beautifully portrayed here by Botticelli. It's beyond belief. Even nicer in color. And if we look closely, we can see the slaves of the devil lurking around, having no power really. To the right, we have a little devil smiling and sort of saying hello. And to the left, there are some small devil creatures. There we have one. The spawns of the devil. So they are all present at the same page, which is very important. They are not disjunct, apart from one and each other. They are more or less on the same page. I can recommend that there are several sources of this coincidence of oppositions. Ian McGilchrist made a couple of videos. There's also a chapter in his latest book, The Matter with Things, which I can highly recommend, but also the quantum mechanical wave and particle. They are absolute oppositions, even more so than evil and goodness. And we read also that there was accusations that Savonarola would be the Antichrist. And also that shows how contradictions are living. When they can exist, the spiritual life is a possibility. When contradictions cannot be put together, there is no spiritual life. There is no goodness, no evil, or I'd say it's just the evil of the monosemic, which is actually worse. But when they coincide, you have goodness. And that's a logic that the left hemisphere or the ordinary mind, the stiff-necked mind, cannot accept. That is exactly what it is to be stiff-necked. Kalle, please come in. Come and join.
Thank you. Page 99. So it was exciting to read that Savonarola and his collaborator, Fra Domenico da Pescia, would have been the two witnesses and that the entry of the French with Charles VIII was in
Yeah, indeed,
1494,
yeah.
and then Savonarola was executed in 1494. So it's roughly 3.5 years. So it's a great correspondence.
It is indeed.
Mm. And this Pope Alexander VI, he's one of the most famous popes of the Renaissance or of all time. He's one of the Spanish popes, Borgia Pope, and he reigned until 1503. Then another famous pope became Pope, Julius II, the one who commissioned the Sistine Chapel from Michelangelo.
Indeed, after a lot of convincing, Michelangelo was very reluctant at the beginning to take on the task of
So
turning
it
the
is.
basilic.
So it's very controversial, of course, to depict indirectly the Pope as the Antichrist, as Botticelli does in this painting. So it's not strange that he wants to hide the message.
No.
So as you see, this Borgia Pope, he died in 1503, so he reigned. So when Botticelli painted his painting, Alexander VI was still a Pope. He reigned from 1492 to 1503. But I think Borgia Pope also had his good sides. He was a great patron of arts. But today he's most remembered as a bad Pope. His support of his son Cesare Borgia as a condottiere of the French king, and they did many bad things. Borgia became a byword for libertinism and nepotism, and he also ordered the execution of Savonarola.
Indeed,
so he could fit.
A horrible thing to do, wasn't it?
Yes, so he would fit the description of an Antichrist. So you could say that the seeds of Reformation was already here 20 years before Luther. And here you have Savonarola in person. He looks very stern. As you can see.
He probably was very stern.
He was extremely stern.
Indeed, a very serious person.
Like an Old Testament prophet. No. So here was the nephew of the Pope. No, or his son, roughly. No.
He was the son of the
Cesare
Pope,
Borgia.
Cesare Borgia, yes.
Yes, indeed.
He was the military man.
So so is let's suppose that prophecy is possible. Sometimes history repeats itself. So why would not the two witnesses, they could refer to this to Rumi Budapest and Savonarola. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Rome per se is bad.
No.
Because it would like to say that Jerusalem is bad. Yes, they have their bad sides, but it goes down and up. So it's not permanently Rome stands for evil, or that Jerusalem permanently stands for evil. So it's changing identity. The evil changes face all the time. Sometimes Rome stands for evil, okay. Sometimes it stands for something good, and so forth.
And it can be both. I think when it is both, it can be pure goodness, and when it's both, it can be this singularity, so to speak.
And I propose that we perhaps. No, there was something I would like to show you. This they mentioned this Signorelli. He was admired by Michelangelo. Signorelli, this painter, Orvieto. These depictions of Antichrist, which are famous. And when Michelangelo painted his Last Judgment, he went to examine Signorelli's depictions in Orvieto.
Okay.
Let me see. Let me see a good depiction.
Luca Signorelli.
And so he depicted it. So he finished it 1503, as the same year as Pope Borchardt died. So let me see. See him. He was a very talented painter.
Indeed, that's beautiful paintings.
Let me see. His Antichrist is very famous. We have to see if you can see. Here. I think the depictions of the Antichrist. Yes, here. This is in Orvieto Cathedral. 1501. So the Pope Alexander VI is still reigning. Roughly at the same time when Botticelli painted his own painting. No, this is very bad. You hardly see it. So the Antichrist is kissing Christ. Let me see if we can find a better painting, because it's an iconic depiction, one of the most famous of the Renaissance. Let me see. Christ. They are not high resolution photos.
You're disappearing a bit there. I can't hear you, Kalle.
Signorelli. I guess. Signorelli. Yes, here this is a great painting. Good high resolution. Antichrist. Kissing Christ.
I think you need to take away some of the pages to get the high resolution. I think to reducing bandwidth. It is not turning up here.
Here. This is beautiful. Oi. The Antichrist.
Oh, look at that.
Oh, even Judas perhaps. 5001.
Indeed there. Thank you very much, Kalle Lundahl. Thank you for your great comments. Thank you everyone for listening in. Have a beautiful morning, day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Bye-bye for now.